Our meeting, and I believe we have all our technology sorted. Thanks for your patience, everybody, and I'll pass back over to Mark.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we'll just get into the presentation, which does explain the report. So perhaps if I talk to the whole slide, and then we'll take questions, and then we'll move through the presentation. So as the report sets out, there's actually five funding options. Two are existing, slight modification, and three new ones, which followed the deliberation meeting last week. So the top of the table sets out the funding options, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's a column which shows the position. If the council didn't proactively reduce its debt, that sort of outlines where council would be. As the report said, we've assumed the only variables that change between the funding options are the rates revenue and the impact on debt and interest. We've assumed the same service levels, we've assumed the same operating budgets, we've assumed the same capital works program as per the draft LTP that was adopted on the 28th of March. Okay, so taking you through, I'll actually work down each column, and I'll take you through the options. So now we have increased. When we consulted option 1, it was a 17.1% rates revenue increase, and then the preferred option was 7% rates revenue increase year on year from years 2 to 10. But following last week's meeting, you resolved to reduce some fees and charges and provide some funding for next year, and that's had an impact of increasing rates. So that 17.1 has gone to 17.19. Okay, so moving down. So if we just look at option 1, there's no change to revenue because that's what we had in the draft LTP. In terms of rates affordability, that's sitting at year 10, so that's 33-34 at 7.5% of projected household income. The debt headroom, so the borrowing capacity, if the council needed money, if there was an unforeseen, unplanned event, it's $422 million. The net debt as at year 10 is 262. The net interest payment at year 10 is $16 million per annum. The total debt movement is 153 million. So applying that funding model enables the council to fund its operating costs, fund its capital works program, and reduce debt by $153 million. One of our treasury ratios, which governs our maximum debt, is the net debt to operating revenue will sit at 107%. And this one is showing how long will it take for the debt reduction to be $10 million or more per annum, and it takes us 6 years. So you've got to hold the strategy, hold the line, keep everything constant for 6 years, and then you start to see a noticeable reduction in debt. So that was option 1. Then I'll show you the impact of option 2. So that's a rates revenue increase of 17.19% in year 2, and then a rates revenue increase of 6% year on year from years 2 to 10. So that option, because you're not increasing rates by 7%, so your starting position is the same, but you're increasing your rates year on year by 1% less. What the impact of that is it reduces your total rates revenue by $72 million. Your rates are lower, so your affordability does drop from 7.5, it drops to 6.9%, and that's the measured at year 10. Your debt headroom is $298 million, so that's the capacity that council has. So that's the difference between its net debt and its debt cap, its debt limit. The net debt at year 10 is 338 million. We've got less revenue, we're retiring less debt, so it's higher than option 1. And because we've got more debt, we're paying more interest. So the net interest at year 10 is $20 million. Now the total debt movement is that option will reduce council debt by $78 million over the life of the long-term plan. The net debt to operating revenue, so your debt's gone up, your revenue's gone down, so it's lifted up, so it's 149%, and it takes longer to start to make notable reductions in debt. It takes 8 years. Last week, you adopted funding scenario number 3. We weren't able to quantify what impacts that has. This report and these slides show those impacts. So option number 3. So option number 3 at 12.25, that includes all the changes to the fees and charges, as well as the funding. What that does is it, compared to option 1, it reduces total rates revenue over the life of the long-term plan by $135 million. Your rates are lower, so your affordability at year 10 is lower. It goes from 7.5 to 6.6%. Your debt capacity or debt headroom is lower. It's $210 million, so it's lower than option 1 and it's lower than option 2. Your actual net debt at year 10 is 402, which is higher than options 1 and 2. So you've taken on less revenue, which means you haven't been able to, you've taken on more debt and you've reduced less. So that's why there's an uplift to your net debt. Your interest charge, your annual interest charge at year 10 is $23 million. You haven't reduced as much debt and you've taken more debt because of that reduction in revenue. Option 3 reduces council debt by only $13 million. There are some slides further on which explains that in more detail. Your net debt to operating revenue lifts to 184%. Your net debt has gone up and your operating revenue has actually gone down, which is causing the lift in the ratio. And this option takes 9 years before you're doing some notable debt reduction. We wanted to look at if council maintained a draft rates revenue increase in year 1 of 12.25, what would be the impact if you increased rates from years 2 to 10 at 7% and years 2 to 10 at 8%, hence the new scenarios or the new funding options, which has taken the time to model. So option number 4, 12, I'll just call it 12.7. So 12.7, what that does is compared to option 1, it reduces your rates revenue by $65 million across the 10 years. It does, the affordability ratio is 7.2%, so it is a little bit lower than 7.5 option 1 because you've reduced some of your rates revenue. Your debt headroom or debt capacity is $329 million. So option 4 is better than option 2 and 3, not as good as option 1. Your actual net debt at year 10 is $330 million. So again, it's lower than option 3 and it's lower than option 2, but it's higher than option 1. The actual interest charge at year 10 is $19 million. That's because you've got higher debt, and your total debt movement across the life of the plan is 85. So it's far better than option 3. It's better than option 2, but it's not as good as option 1. Your net debt to operating revenue, it comes down by $140 million. That's because your net debt's reduced and your revenue is actually not come down as far. So there's an improvement on that ratio. And we start to see a notable reduction in debt far quicker. It takes 7 years compared to 9. So that's the difference between a 6% rates increase year on year and 7. And then we look at 8%. So we're increasing rates revenue by 8% year on year after growth from years 2 to 10. So the impact that model has is it actually increases your rates revenue by $8 million compared to option number 1. Because we're increasing our rates revenue, our affordability is going the wrong way. Our affordability becomes less. It goes from 7.5% to 7.8%. Your debt headroom or debt capacity, because you're increasing revenue, the compounding impact of 8% plus 8% plus 8% creates debt capacity of $455 million. That's better than option 1 and far better than options 2, 3 and 4. Your net debt is $255 million, so that's the lowest of all the options. And as we'd expect, our net interest is $16 million at year 10. So the total debt reduction, so option 5 reduces the debt the most by 161 million. So although it's a slow start in year 1, the impact of 8% years 2 to 10 has a significant impact on the numbers. So it reduces debt by 161 million. Your revenue's gone up, your debt's gone down, so your net debt to operating revenue is sitting at 100%. All of those net debt to operating revenue ratios are very, very good. If council did nothing, it would be sitting at 199%. So there's an improvement along the way. And then the time taken for us to see a notable reduction in our debt under option 5 is 6 years. So it's faster than option 4, much faster than 3, much faster than 2, and it's the same as 1. If there's questions on this slide, I'm happy to take them, or else I'll move through the presentation.
There may well be, but we might want to go through some more information before asking questions. But anytime anybody wants to ask a question, just flick your light on. Councillor Coe. We can't hear you right now. Can just hear you. Do you have a volume you can turn up, or? No, I can just hear you very faintly. No, still very faint. No. Could it be our system? Sophie, can you hear her? So it might be in here. I suggest we move on while we have a little look at our system at our end, and then we'll come back to you, Liz. So they can hear Liz online, they just can't hear her in the room here, so it could be our volume settings. We'll just have a wee look at that. But Mark, do you want to carry on with the next slide, and we'll come back to that?
Thank you. So this slide shows for each of the funding options. It's comparing options 2, 3, 4, and 5 against the council's base option of number 1. So the council's preference was 17 and 7, and that's what the council consulted on. So that is being classed as our base option. So this slide shows what is the difference between each option compared to the base. And so I'll take you through that. Some of it we've already touched on. So option 2, which is 17.6, we reduce rates revenue by $72 million. That reduces the affordability. So option 2 is 0.6% more affordable. That's the measure at year 10. The debt headroom, there's $124 million less headroom. So the borrowing capacity is $124 million less. The net debt is $75 million higher at year 10 compared to year 1. The net interest is $4 million higher at year 10. $4 million is $77,000 a week on interest. The debt movement, we reduce our debt by $75 million less with option 2. The net debt to operating revenue increases by 38% compared to option 1, and it takes 2 years longer to start making debt reduction of 10 million plus. Similarly, option 3 at 12.6, we wipe out $135 million of revenue. That makes this option 0.9% more affordable, standing at year 10. The debt capacity is reduced by $212 million. Our net debt is $140 million higher compared to option 1, and our net interest charge standing at year 10 is $7 million more, which is $135,000 more per week. The debt reduction is $140 million less. The net debt to operating revenue is a 71% increase, and the time taken for debt reduction takes us 3 years longer than option 1. Option 4, just running down. $65 million rates revenue is reduced. It becomes 0.3% more affordable. We have $93 million less debt headroom or debt capacity. Our net debt is $68 million higher compared to option 1. The net interest charge at year 10 is $3 million higher, which equates to $58,000 more per week. The total debt movement is $68 million less debt is reduced with this option, and we've had a 31% increase in our net debt to operating revenue ratio, and it actually takes 1 year. Option 4 takes 1 year longer than option 1 to start notably reducing council debt. And then option 5, we actually increase the rates revenue by $8 million, so we're in a completely different position. It becomes 0.3% less affordable. So it actually becomes, we know we go from 7.5% to 7.8%, so it's less affordable. The debt headroom is $33 million less than option 1. The net debt is the debt headroom is $33 million. Is it less or more? We just check. I just want to check that. Sorry, I'm just looking at this. It's 455. Yep. Sorry, my mistake. It's the debt capacity is actually $33 million more, not less. That's my error. Apologies. That's why I paused. The net debt is $8 million lower at year 10. The net interest at year 10 is exactly the same as option 1. The total debt movement is this option would reduce council's debt $8 million more than option 1. The net debt to operating revenue ratio actually goes down 6%, and the time taken it takes the same amount of time for notable debt reduction for option 5. So that's just comparing those standalone options to the base option. So you can see, it's the wrong word, but when you play with rates revenue, it has quite an impact on your debt and your interest charges.
Okay, before we move on to the next slide, we'll just see if we can hear Liz now. Councillor Coe?
Right, can you hear me now?
We can.
Great, thank you. Look, it's just a quick question. Mark, you did say at the start that service levels would remain the same. I just have a question how that works in the event that you've got net interest increasing. So, for example, in option 3 there, the net interest goes up to 23 million. Or it's 23 million as opposed to 16 million. But I'm presuming like the net interest is part of our OPEX. So when interest changes, that must have an impact on the funds that are available for other operating expenses besides interest. So in other words, if your OPEX stays the same but your interest has gone up, there's or gone down, there's a change in what's available to fund other expenses besides interest. Is that correct? Is my logic correct on that one?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, your logic is correct. So what we're saying is, when we looked at each of the 5 options, we started what is the rates funded expenditure, and it's the same. So that rates funded expenditure is the expenditure that we need to deliver the current service levels. So the starting position is that's exactly the same for each scenario. When we start to change the rates revenue, and you'll see in my next slide that what that does is it creates rates funding deficits, and then when we have that, because we're maintaining the same service levels, we've still got those costs. We are borrowing the money to fund that shortfall, and that is creating more interest, and that's being added to the debt movement. So you're absolutely right. We take on more debt, we take on more interest. You could say that's a change in service level, but to fund the service levels that we do in year 1 right through to year 10, we've kept that constant. And by changing revenue, you're creating the shortfall, which we're topping up by debt.
Right. Okay.
So I think it might become a bit clearer when I get to the next the next slide. But just for the benefit of the room, we aren't saying, look, your interest is going up, which means you have to then take the equivalent out of the operating costs, which is a reduction in service level. We're just saying your interest is, when you take on more debt, there's an interest component to that. That's being added to the overall debt, and that's the impact on the debt movement on these tables. It includes the interest.
So in other words, you're basically compounding the interest kind of thing.
Yes.
I was
Yeah.
going to say exactly that, Liz.
Yeah. So the other thing that's clear from this, and I just want to check my thinking. So if we are assuming we want to create that debt headroom of 400 and something rather million, basically between options 1 and option, you've got option 1 or option 5 will achieve that. But under option 5, you've actually got an $8 million increase in rates. So in other words, you achieve the same outcome with option 5, but at a much greater cost to the ratepayer.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So if we are determined to achieve that level of headroom, the 420 or so million headroom, then the cheapest option for the ratepayer is to take option 1. Because if the only other way to achieve it under these scenarios is option 5, which is $8 million more that we need from the ratepayer.
That's correct, Councillor.
Yeah.
So just on that point, so that's absolutely right. So at a 12.25% rates increase in year 1, if you wanted to achieve what you were trying to achieve with the 17.7, it's option 5. That is a bit more unaffordable. It goes from 7.5 to 7.8, and it actually draws down more rates revenue than option 1. Option 2 still does make a small impact on your debt reduction. It's not as much as option 1, but if you compare 2 to no debt reduction, I'm just going to use the pointer. Although we take $72 million of rates revenue out, your rates, we'd expect affordability to come down. But if you did nothing, your debt capacity is 170. On option 2, it's 298. So there is a small uplift there. You have increased your borrowing capacity. Your net debt, instead of being 415, has come down to 338. Your net interest at year 10, instead of being 23, is 20. So option 2 does shift the council towards creating some resilience, or future resilience, or a resilient future for Kapiti, but it's not as much as option 1. Option 5 achieves what option 1 is trying to achieve. Okay, so this is a new slide that we didn't have at the briefing on Tuesday, and I'd like to explain it. So we look at the rates funded expenditure and we look at our rates revenue year on year, and so where our rate funded expenditure is higher than our rates revenue, we have a deficit, and where our rates revenue is higher than our expenditure, we have a surplus. It's the surplus that we're using to reduce our debt, because we're intentionally rate funding for surpluses to reduce debt. And so what I'd like to show you, so I've got options 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 down there, and our top option, our preference 17.7 is along the top. What I'm showing you is year on year, is there a rates deficit or is there a rates surplus? And that's this first chunk. So what this table is saying is at 17.7 in year 1. So you would expect year 1 to have surpluses, as that's what we provided to council to vote on for consultation. And that's exactly what it's doing. So it is deliberately reducing debt. So you have a surplus of $1 million in year 2. You don't have a surplus in year 3, but you have a surplus of 4, 6, 10, 18, 26. These are in millions. So in year 9, you have a rates surplus of 35 million. And it's because your rates revenue is going up, you're fully funding depreciation, and you're drawing down less debt. And so that option there generates a rate surplus of $148 million. Surpluses retire debt or reduce debt. So the debt movement is broken down to, so debt plus is, what I'm saying is, so for every deficit that we have to borrow more money. That's debt plus. And when we have to borrow more money, we have more interest on that. So that's included in debt plus. Debt minus is when we have a surplus, we start to reduce debt. And so what it's showing under option 1, you have $148 million worth of surplus. The debt minus is 153. So the difference between 148 and 153, because you're reducing debt so much, we've actually able to reduce. We've lowered our interest costs by $5 million over the life of the long-term plan, and so we've retired $5 million more debt. And so that's why option 1, in terms of debt, it reduces 153 million. And so that all looks positive. Of course it looks positive because that's what we modelled and that's what we consulted on. Now option 2. So option 2, it's 17%, so there's no change in year 1, we break even. It's 6%, so there's no surplus in year 1, we break even. Year 2, we actually have a deficit, so we have to take on $2 million of debt because that's a funding shortfall. Our rates revenue is not fully funding our rates expenditure. So we've had to take on $2 million more debt. In year 4, we're okay. In year 1, we start to make surpluses. This is the compounded impact of a 6% rates revenue increase on a base of 17. So what that translates to over the life of the long-term plan is there's a $75 million rate surplus. And so the debt increase is the $2 million that we needed over there. And then the debt reduction is $80 million because that includes the interest that we've saved. So the net impact, 2 up, 80 down, we've reduced debt by 78. So when you look at the option of 17.6, it reduces your debt by 78 million. And you can see the difference. You can see the difference between a 7% rates increase years 2 to 10 and 6. You can see we're making a surplus of 4, 6, 10. We've only made a surplus of 4. We've got much bigger surpluses in the out years, 26 or 14, 35 to 21, 47 to 30. So this is how these models work. Then we drop to the 12.6. So this is all in millions, so it's rounding. So you know when we went to 12.25, we increased our rates revenue by 340,000. So we had a gap of 4.7. We've increased our rates revenue by 340. So 4.7's become 4.3, rounding in millions, drops it to 4. So that's why you're seeing 4, not 5. Okay, so by going to 12.6, we know we've got a rates a funded deficit, then that's the Three Waters costs, those operating costs that are still there, have been there. So we've got a deficit of 4, so we have to borrow 4. We've got a deficit of 5, we have to borrow 5. We've got a deficit of 7, we have to borrow 7. So the impact of all those deficits is we have to increase our debt plus the interest associated with that debt goes up $32 million. In year 8, the impact of rates revenue increases, we start to have a surplus. We have a surplus of 7, 13, 31. So that rate surplus there is $13 million. The uplift to the debt, by dropping to 12, we take on $32 million because it takes time for the rates revenue to ratchet up to then for us to break even and make a surplus. So our debt movement plus interest goes up 32, but we are making surpluses in year 8, 7, 13, 21. So we're able to reduce our debt, and by reducing the debt, we've reduced interest. So we are able to reduce debt by 45. The net movement between that is a $13 million reduction. So 12.2 increases debt by 32, and we reduce 45. So that's why it's 13. So on the table, it looks like it's wrong, but it's not. 12 creates deficits all the way up to year 7. 6 is better. So we've still got the deficit of 4, our revenue's not going up at 6, it's going up at 7. So our deficits start to change. And we actually break even in year 5, whereas against the 6 version, we've got a deficit of 5 that we have to borrow 5. We've got a deficit of 3, we have to borrow 3. We're starting to make surpluses. So the total of the rates, the rate surplus and deficit equates to an $82 million rate surplus across the 10 years. And so we have to borrow $16 million plus interest for this option, but we're able to retire $101 million of debt. So there's a net debt reduction of 85 on that option. And then option 8 is better still. It's still got your deficit in 4, but your deficits are lower because you're going up 8%. So it's lower than options the 6 and 7, so it drops to 3. So your deficits are over a shorter period of time, and they're smaller because your rates revenue is going up. You start to hit a surplus in year 4, and so we start to, that surplus is retiring debt and reducing interest. So the net impact of the rates funding surplus deficit is 156 surplus. Even on option 5, the council will increase debt by $10 million, but when it starts to generate those surpluses, we will reduce our debt by 171. So the net debt movement is $161 million. And so we can see from this table, we can see that option 5 achieves option 1, but more. This slide, as the report says, so long-term plans, our long-term plan's 10 years, but our long-term plan is revised every 3 years. So we wanted to provide you, well, what does each option look like at year 3 of the long-term plan? So I'm sorry, it's a table full of numbers, so we've got, so we're showing...
That's what we asked for, Mark, actually. Thank you for the numbers. I know they've been hard work.
I have a question about the previous slide. Could I ask that, please? Thank you. Just a question around this one. In our consultation document, we refer to a $3.5 million deficit that we carry already in rates that we're debt funding, where there's a gap. Where is that 3.5 referenced in this slide? Because from my understanding, it should actually say under option 1, 17.7, year 1 should have 3.5 million deficit in there.
Yeah.
Because our CD only zeroes that at year 2.
Yep. Thank you.
Is that right?
You're absolutely right. So what the starting point is we're comparing rates revenue to rates funded expenditure. So it excludes the 3.5 million. So in year 1, it's just taking, so we know that we're not funding 3.5 million, so we know we have to decrease. So we're just looking at, so a rates funding surplus is the measure of rates revenue less rates funded expenditure. So the 3.5 in year 1 is taken out. So it's not there. In year 2, we're still comparing rates revenue to rates funded expenditure. What we're doing in year 2 is we're closing that non-funded depreciation gap. So the rates funded expenditure is increased by 3.5 million. So it's comparing the rates funded revenue less an uplift of 3.5 million. So it is there, and that's why you don't see it, because option 1 is in year 2, So you don't see $3.5 million in there because we're not funding the $3.5 million gap. It's not in the rates funded expenditure. So we're comparing like with like our rates revenue less our rates funded expenditure. In year 2, we fully closed that gap, and under option 1, not only in year 2 are we closing the rates funded gap of 3.5, but plus we're meeting all our costs. We're starting to reduce debt. That's the impact of 7% in year 2. It's basically our costs sit at 6% in year 2. That's closing that 3.5 gap, and then that 1% extra rates is retiring that $1 million of debt.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, that's all lovely. Just a question. At what point have our rates actually doubled in that? My concern is the affordability of our ratepayers. On that, yet we're reducing our debt. But at what point, I think, is it 9 years that our rates have doubled, or is it 7 years? Do you know at what point on that compounding, what our ratepayers? Because my concern is affordability, that no one is actually going to be able to afford to pay these rates, and we're going to be defaulting, and our rates rebate scheme will be going through the roof. And this is all great in principle, but we're actually dealing with people's lives and ability to exist.
Yeah, it's affordability. Yeah, thank you.
Which is not your
Councillor.
fault, but
Yeah, thank you, Councillor.
Yeah.
We're just going to pull up the financial strategy document, as it does talk to a 7% increase over 9 years
it's doubled.
is a 63% increase. But what we've done, so we're just pulling that up now to be able to tell you. But so that's why we have this affordability measure. So so a 10%, so general rule of thumb, a 10% rates increase over 10 years is 100%. So your rates have doubled. So our rates don't double, but they get to about 75, 80%. So we know that, and the financial strategy actually talks to that. But what we do is we're looking at affordability. So we know they doubled. It's fine. That's the mathematical, that's what happens to rates over time. Eventually they will double over a prolonged period of time. But we have to look at affordability, the ability to pay at that point in time. And so that's what we're measuring at year 10. So that's that 7.5%. So that's the average rate over the average median household income, and it's 7.5%. So we know the Shand report was 5. We've used the proxy of 7 over a 27-year period. So that Shand report was 2007. So it's 17 years old already. This is measuring affordability at 33, 34. So what are our rates going to be in 33, 34 versus their household income? And that's how we get that measure of 7.5%. And that's what the financial strategy talks to in great detail. So yes, percentage-wise, if you increase by 4% or 5%, in 20 years' time, your rates have doubled.
Yep.
But you look at affordability, the ability to pay, what is your rates as a percentage of your household income at a particular point in time? Yep.
Just a comment and a question, I guess. I struggle with that Shand, that 5%.
So we're asking questions. I'm
Yes,
going to be
question.
quite strict on
That's
that
a question,
today.
yeah. So I struggle with the 5% being 7% affordability, and my question will come. The affordability now for households is a lot harder than it was 12 years ago. So power's gone through the roof. Rates, insurance has gone through the roof. Replacement of clothing and vehicles gone through that inflation on all those other things. So wouldn't that mean that the affordability for your rates should go down or up because everything else is more expensive? So aren't we looking at this the wrong way around?
Yeah,
And
look,
it's because it's a percentage, it's not inflation adjusted. So aren't we looking at this the wrong way in terms of rates affordability? If that makes sense.
Look, yeah. Look, the measure of affordability is your median rates over your median household income. That's the formula. There's no question that cost of living's gone up. Council costs to deliver its services have gone up too.
Yeah,
and so we built that in. So we're just saying using the measure at 7.5%, which is the only measure we have. We've seen how our cost increases have gone up 30% in construction. CPI has gone up over 7%. Our inflation has only gone up 2.9%. So we're using it as a proxy. And the 2% increase over 27 years, of course it's subjective, but we're just saying over 27 years we've gone up 2%. If we looked at LGCI or inflation over 27 years, it's at least 54%. So it's a proxy, it's a guide. It's a guide for this table to say, is it affordable or not? But that's the measure we use.
Can I just add to that, Your Worship?
Sure.
If I just think about the question and the examples that you used, and I think about Mark's response, we're kind of in the same space, right? So it costs council more to run the organisation, as it costs us more to run our households, and it's all relative. And if you think about the capital value of properties as they increase, with that increase comes an ability, whether real or not, right, to be able to service things. So for council, it's a real balancing act. If I think about, and I know very different, if I think about taxes, as tax brackets change, the government generates more income. Now, you can't really compare taxes with rates because the imbalance is so different. And if you think about GST, the balance is so different, right? GST is more than rates take. So I guess the challenge for us is maintaining some sort of level of equality, and it's really difficult.
Councillor Cofer?
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. Mark, thank you. You've been burning the midnight oil, and it's really much appreciated. It's pretty clear. If we just for a minute could just have a look at the overall picture, and you continued reference to Three Waters. If you took the Three Waters out of all of these calculations, where would we stand then? And would it be a possibility to take it out and look at it separately with regard to, I hate to say it, development contributions, things like that? It's a different rating regime, isn't it, for the water itself? Sorry to take your time, but I just wondered where we would be if we didn't have that factor in it.
Thank you, Councillor.
As long as you're not asking for more numbers in the graph, that's all good.
No, it's just a philosophical question. Probably get a philosophical answer.
Yeah, look. As we know that under legislation, the council's next long-term plan must have the Three Waters, and they must be in there for 10 years. And so we still retain the assets, and we have the operating costs, and we still have the requirement to do the renewals and the upgrades in our capital works program driven by our asset management plan. So the impact of that is huge. It's about a third of our business. So it's not simply the 4.7 million that we've been talking about. That's just the funding shortfall. So that's, as we know, we've signed an MOU. We're exploring options of another entity. But until such time as there's certainty, we won't remove the costs. But it's roughly a third of our business. It's a third of our operating costs, and it's a fair chunk. If we look at our capital works program and if we start to classify that program by activity, most of it is Three Waters and access and transport. So it's a huge part of our business. So it's impossible to answer your question other than to say that they must be in the long-term plan until such time as we have a different entity, if we ever do. And that question expands. It would impact the revenue that we get from water, wastewater, stormwater, the depreciation, the revenue we get from that. So that's a huge question, but it's a huge part of the Three Waters is a huge part of the long-term plan.
Thanks, Mark. I can see, 5 million a year for 10 years is 50 million, and okay, we're looking at sort of 150 million total, aren't we? Looking at your totals there. And just another very philosophical question again. As you know, we've had the government sort of stamp intensification on our province, and has this had a bearing in future Three Water growth? The fact that we have to put 15-storied buildings in the middle of Paparamu, 6 stories within a walking distance of Little Old Otaki Railway Station, has this had a bearing on your calculations? If so, how much? Thanks.
The short answer is yes, because we have to take growth into account, the growth of a population household. So that's in the asset management plan for the Three Waters and access and transport. You should be able to see that in the infrastructure strategy, and that's we have taken that into account as how much is for upgrades assets to be able to service the increase of population and household. That's what we have increased our development contributions for that. So that's all. And if you ask me exact number, I'm sorry, I won't be able to provide on the spot. But in saying, so we have to, as part of assets management plan, we have to take growth into account.
If for some reason the government were a little bit over enthusiastic by calling us Tier 1 intensification, and if for some reason that development didn't take place, say just half that projected development, would this have an effect on the 10-year rates?
Possibly, yes, because it will have impact on development contributions that you're going to charge. Because as part of the legislation, it does say your development contribution is for a certain capital works program related to upgrades and for the district growth. If that growth doesn't realise, we have to refund developers for the contributions they've already made.
Right. Okay, well, would it be fair to ask that if we are going for a spike in the rates of 17%, and that is accommodating that future, projected growth, would it be overzealous to say that an overzealous growth shouldn't really have an overzealous rates hike initially? And what I'm saying is, let's go softly for a year or two, and then see how that projected development's going.
Yeah, look, thank you, councillor. So the long-term plan is a 10-year plan that the council adopts, and so it's at a point in time. So we are here today, and we have the Three Waters, and we have the intensification, and our asset management plans are building that in. So we're preparing for that today, and so the long-term plan is a document. They are budgets for the next 10 years. Things change. That's why under the Local Government Act you do annual plans. That's why you may have to do amendments to long-term plans. So we have to plan for what we know today in the legislation that we're governed by today, and that's what's reflected in your long-term plan. That's why long-term plans themselves are revised every 3 years. But our responsibility, once you've adopted so the long-term plan needs to have what it needs to deliver on the projected levels of service plus comply with legislation. When as soon as we've adopted the long-term plan, we'll be starting to work on the annual plan for year 2 of the long-term plan. And so as things change, we adjust, and we'll be bringing that to the table. But the long-term plan has got in it what it needs to do based on the information today.
Oh, thank you for that. That's clarified it really well. Thanks for all the hard work you've put into it. It's brilliant.
Councillor Warwick.
My question is in follow-up to Glenn's concern, which is a concern, that rates will increase by 63%, you said, on the 17%, is that right, in 10 years? Whatever it is, say it was 100%. My understanding is that if we go for 12 and 8, we're actually going to land in the same kind of vicinity of the increase in rates. So we're just wrapping it in cotton wool, and we're going to end up with more debt, which will put us in a worse position, spending more of our hard-earned money on interest. Is that correct? We're going to land reasonably in the same kind of zone with rates increase average?
Thank you, councillor. So with the affordability, so we take the median rates today, and we project them at the 7% or 6% or 8% or whatever it is to 33, 34. We also project median household income today. That's been projected at 3% for the next 10 years. So, we're not just saying, so rates increase 63%, but let's not forget median household income increases as well. So we've been pretty conservative at 3%. So it's still a measure at year 10. And we've got the measure year on year, and we'll see that in a slide. We show you the measure at year 3. So I guess I just wanted to clarify that rates go up, but so does median household income. And we have been, at our 7.5% affordability measure, we've been pretty conservative at 3% over the next 10 years. Could be high, could be lower. We've projected it that amount. Well, I guess how far, how fast for ratepayers. If you're going to go through the pain, get a good result. Build the resilience that Kapiti needs for the future. The 12.8 has not been designed to try and achieve what 17.7 does. We've just simply taken the cue from last week. If we did go 12.6, what does that look like? Our financial strategy has said that the range in rates revenue increases from years 2 to 10 is 6 to 8. And so we've just brought back to the table what that looks like. There's no reverse engineering here whatsoever. There's 5 options for you to consider, and these are the impacts based on the financial strategy and the change in direction that was made last week.
Okay. Oh, Cam?
Ngā Madam Chair. Lots of numbers, all sorts of fun, harking back to 7th form accounting and the works. Catamount the pigeons time, so therefore 12, 8, then 7 would put us roughly in the same place as the 17.7? Like just
12.8. 12.8 over time would put us in the would put us slightly better.
Yeah, I was looking at with those slightly better numbers,
17.7.
and that's why I was thinking where the 12.87 actually gets us to roughly the same place. Yes, it is beating about the bush, but the concern I have is that we just don't seem to have any resiliency in there. If we look at Cyclone Gabrielle and these weather events that are coming through, there's no fat in the system whatsoever for us to actually survive without major external help.
Yeah.
If
A
something like these
reminder
came
that we're
along.
asking questions right now.
Yeah, sorry.
And
There was a
community
question
board-
at the start.
Community board members, welcome to contribute to the debate.
Yep.
Right.
Thank you.
Moving on.
So I'll just carry, moving on. So this slide is the 5 options, but it's the 3-year view. And that's because we know in 3 years' time, we will be doing a new LTP. So what are these options achieving in 3 years' time? So if the council does not actively reduce its debt capacity is 162 million, the net debt at year 3 is 288, and the net interest at year 3 is 14 million. Obviously, that's not reducing debt, so there's no movement on debt reduction. And then the net debt to operating revenue is 179%. So, so just to be clear, that debt movement, we would have taken on debt for our CapEx program. This is looking at how much are we reducing. So if we're not actively reducing debt, that's why it's saying 0. Option 1 for the first 3 years, affordability is 5.7%. That's looking at the median rate in year 3 versus the median household income. It's 5.7%. The debt capacity is 149 million, so better than doing nothing. And our net debt is 286. Sorry, it looks a bit small. 286. Net interest is slightly lower at 13 million, but we have actually managed to, over the 3-year period, we've reduced $1 million, which you've seen in the previous slide from the rate surplus. And our ratio is 184%. So option 2, we have a $3 million reduction in rates compared to option 1. Affordability is sitting at 5.6. Debt headroom of 139, so not as good as 1. 290 is the net debt, so it's higher than option 1. And the net interest is slightly higher. You've got more debt, so the interest is higher. And we've actually had to take on more debt because of that rates funding deficit. And the ratio has gone up. Option 3, same story. So in 3 years, option 3 reduces the total rates revenue over 3 years compared to option 1 of 18. Affordability has gone down because your rates revenues come down, so your affordability's ticked down to 5.4. Your debt headroom is 110, so it's less than options 1 and 2. Stronger, it's better than doing nothing. 305 is your net debt, so it's higher than options 1 and 2. Um, and then we've got, because you've taken on more debt, the net interest is 15 million, you've got more debt, interest has gone up, and you've had to take $17 million on more debt on. So that's why your net debt on that option is higher than doing nothing, because you're actually taking on, your revenue's dropped and you're having to fund your rates funded operating expenditure through debt. So that's so not good for the first 3 years. And then option 4, you've reduced 15 million, your affordability is ticked up by 5.5 because you're getting more rates, your debt headroom is 119. So it's a little bit better than 3, not as good as 1 or 2. Your net debt is 301, your net interest expense is 14, so it's a little bit less than 3. And you've had to take on even option 4, which looks good over 10 years. For 3 years, you've still had to take on $13 million because you've still got those rates funded deficits. And even option 5 for the first 3 years, you've still got those rates funded deficits, which we've seen in the previous slide. So your affordability, because your rate funding 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8, is ticked up to 5.6. Your debt headroom is 129 million, so it's better than 4, it's better than 3, but it's not as good as 2 or 1. And it's not as good as doing nothing, because you've actually had to debt fund your deficits. $10 million increase to your total debt movement, and your ratio has actually sitting at 196. So that's just looking at year 3, and what you've seen from this slide is it takes time. Options, anything starting with a 12, it takes a while to get into the surplus. So, because you're actually taking on more debt to fund your operating expenses by dropping to 12.2.
So just before we leave that slide, I'd just like to focus on that last row. So a few of those options take us over 200% net debt operating revenue. What's the kind of maximum percentage that you would want to achieve to avoid a negative downgrade in your
Thank you, Your Worship. So the Green Line strategy was aimed at getting us below 250. Just in terms of their recent downgrade, we really would want to be below 220. The report talks to S&P Global. We're actually really trying to either maintain our rating or strengthen our rating. So the lower that ratio is, the better we are. We would like to have the same credit rating as the Crown. We can never be higher. The Crown's on AA+. We'd love to be AA+. But to keep it as low as possible puts us in the best possible position.
Okay, thank you.
I am nearly done, I promise. And these are just little pictures, which a great picture is better than 1,000 words from me. So
They're both good.
So we're going to show you 2 charts for each of the 5 scenarios. So there's 10 slides still to go. But what this is showing is it's showing for this option, it's showing your debt profile over the 10 years, and it's against our quantified limit. So in other words, the limit on our borrowing, which is the same as a credit card limit. So we can't borrow more than that. So and the difference between our debt and our limit is what we call, that's the headroom. That's the capacity that we've got to respond to opportunities or to respond to natural disasters or significant damaging incidents. So all we're saying here, so under 17.7, it does take us a wee while. So your rates revenue is going up, so your quantified limit is going up as its percentage of operating revenue. And it takes a little while, but we go up because we're still funding our CapEx program. So we've still got a $75 million CapEx program year on year. It goes up. And then we start to see a lovely reduction. And in year 10, that is the headroom. So the council still has to stay the course before it can actually start to see sizable reductions. But when we talk about borrowing capacity or debt headroom, we're talking about the difference between our net debt and our upper limit. So that's what it looks like on 17.7. And then I love these. This is just showing in the dark blue, the navy blue. So if we weren't reducing debt at all, this just shows you year on year how much debt we would take on to fund the capital program. And the lighter blue is showing you with an active debt program how much debt do we require year on year. And I'll step through this one, but the others I'll just let you look at, because once you understand this, the rest are all the same. So under 17.7 in year one, there's no debt reduction. We're borrowing 27 million. In year two, you've seen we had that surplus, so we borrow 1 million less. So we've made a reduction of 1. Year three, we can't. Year four, we reduce our debt by $4 million because we're starting to get those surpluses. We've made a $4 million surplus, we reduce our debt. 28, 29, it goes to 7. 29, 30, instead of 20, we're drawing 10, so we've reduced it by 10. 30, 31 is where we start to see the difference. This is where we start to make notable reductions to our debt. Instead of needing 10, we're actually reducing by 19. 30, 31, we've got a $26 million reduction, we've got a $35 million reduction, and then we've got a $47 million reduction. So that's how it works. So even on 17.7, it takes us all the way to 30.31, or actually it's 29.30 because there's 10 million there. So it takes us a while. 17.6, again, this is the debt profile, quantified limits. So the quantified limits have dropped because our rates revenue has dropped, and that's our debt profile. Under 17.6, we've got some deficits, we're borrowing more money, and we're reducing less, so the headroom has come down. And we start to get quite close over there. If we look at the debt reduction, it's pushing it out. The moment we start to reduce our revenue, we're pushing our debt reduction program into the out years. And you can see that there. So you can see it's round about there that we're actually really starting to pay down debt. And you've seen that in those surpluses on that one, on that slide. 12.6, the quantified limits have come down. You've reduced revenue. That's the debt profile. We're taking on debt and reducing less. And that's what the profile looks like. Then we've got the year-on-year debt reduction. Pushes right out to, you can see the difference. We're just reducing less debt on 12.6. That's at 13 million. So that's the scenario where we only reduce our debt 13 million overall. 12.7, better than 12.6. We've lifted our quantified limits. We're creating a bit more headroom. So a nice improvement. And then we're actually starting to reduce debt. 30.31, we've got a $12 million debt reduction. We've got a 4 million over there. So it just takes a bit of time. 12.8. This is a fantastic option. This achieves more than option one of 17.7. We've pushed our quantified limits up because our rates revenue's gone up, and we've actually reduced even more debt than option one. So unsurprisingly, it's a better curve and it's got a whole lot more debt capacity. And this debt capacity is what we are using instead of a self-insurance fund at the moment. And then this is the debt reduction profile. So it looks better. It even looks better than 17.7. You're reducing debt far quicker, and that's the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of work's gone into that. I can see why you went few at the end of it. Do I have any more questions? No.
I'm going to ask a question.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Councillor Pravanov.
Yes, so thank you. So firstly, thank you, Mark and the team, for all the work that you have done into providing us with all these figures. Thank you for saying that. I'm not sure if it's quite true, but anyway. So my question is, and so this is modelling. So my question, and I suppose being a councillor, as we've sat around this table before, I know that when we end up doing the long-term plan in the next 3 years, what has been mulled before doesn't necessarily hold. And so I'm just interested to know, and often the rates don't go down, they go up. So realistically, and this is obviously crystal ball gazing, all the predicted rates increases further down the line, how likely are they to stay at those either 7%, 6%, 8% scenarios that you've given here? And I know, you know, and it's nothing, you know, it's basically, it's modelling, and it's obviously things change without our control, so, because that actually will change the whole scenario versus making this year's rates strike on information that we know is current.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. I think we, I know there's a couple of copies of the consultation document on the table. So in that document, in the financial strategy discussion, we showed what the rates increases are without debt reduction. Some years were 2, some years were 3, some years were 4. And so the strategy to reduce debt takes us up to 7. The long-term plan is, what's flowing through the long-term plan is a report based on October 2023, which gave us our inflation indices. So we've done everything possible to make sure that our budgets are as accurate as they can be. We started the journey, we took $10 million of costs out of operating costs. That included the 4.7. We put that back in. We sought 5 million extra costs. That was reduced to 2. Put a cap on staff. The financial strategy sets the range, and ideally the council stays within that range. But if it breaches that range, it breaches that range. There's no consequence. The annual plan is there's an opportunity to revise those budgets, but what we've put forward is a long-term plan for you to consider that is actively reducing the debt, because by actively reducing the debt, it is reducing the cost to the ratepayers. So those budgets are lean. They're as lean as they can be to deliver the current levels of service. The 7% going up 7, ratcheting up to 7 does allow you to pay rates. So it depends on council's appetite in future years. There will be cost pressures, of course there will be, and we have to table those cost pressures with you, and we have to make informed decisions. But we've ratcheted up our costs to enable us to pay debt. So that 7% allows us to pay down debt, and so the decisions, the future decisions for council will be, do you maintain that course? Do you keep that course going? How do we address the cost increase? Because there will be some. I mean, as I've said in the report, local government cost inflation or local government inflation is 2.9% versus 7% in CPI. Now, it's standard practice to inflate by 2.9. Our cost increases are far more. But what we need to do is, at some point, on the 27th of June, we need to adopt a long-term plan, which sets budgets for a long-term plan within strategies and policies. And then year on year, we have to do an annual plan, and that has to adjust for unforeseen. But we've tried to account for, we've tried looking forward, and we've looked at our asset management plans, and we've looked at cost pressures. We don't know what's happening with the Three Waters. So at this point in time, this is our best estimate of what we can put on the table that allows us to build that resilience that Kapiti needs. But it could change.
So thank you, Mark. And I know that, you've spent a lot of time on this, and I appreciate how, you've done the best given the current information, but it will change. So I'm not, so I just wanted to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was the reason why we requested the extra information around the position, the table that this puts us in year 3. Could I have that slide? Is it possible to pull the slides back up and have that back up. I just wanted to have another look at it myself, and it's not. I'm in the report now, not in the slide presentation. Or I can find it. That table. Okay.
No.
Okay, don't worry, it's in the report apparently. What's the page number in the report? Yeah.
The year 3 table.
Paragraph 15 is the 10-year view. 16 is the 3-year view.
No. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no, that isn't the one. Did you go forward one? Oh yeah, the three. That's the one. Yeah. So I'm not seeing any other questions.
I don't have a question, I have
Kim?
like a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think before we start commenting, I think the simplest thing today to do, because we're kind of going backwards and forwards a bit, is to move the recommendations that are on the table, and then if anybody wants to move an amendment to them, then that's how we'll do it. But I just want to check. These are fresh resolutions today, aren't they? Any previous movers and seconders, they can still move amendments. Yeah. Okay. Got myself. So I'll just go back to the agenda. We're kind of toggling between documents today. Yeah, if we could put the resolutions on the screen, that'd be good. So just while we do that, I just want to check around the table. This report was quite late coming. Does everybody feel like they've had an opportunity to read it? Because what I can do is consider the rest of the council agenda, and then we can get to this after the lunch break if people haven't had a chance to do that. But I'm also, I've had a good look at it myself this morning, so I'm happy that I've been able to digest it. So can I... Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I've considered it, and because I come to the table with an unprejudiced view, I do like the idea of taking a bit of time to have a think about this. I mean, if everybody's comfortable with just charging ahead now, but it might well be that there's a bit of thinking to be done. I mean, we've just had a fairly complex simplified. But there's a bit to take in, and it might truncate the conversation a bit if everybody's had an absolute opportunity to just go through the paper, have a think about it,
Do you feel like you personally have enough information?
I've got enough information, I'm just not sure that I've gone through it all sufficiently.
Yeah,
I think we've all got plenty of information. It's just
yeah, we do.
going through it, being comfortable, because it's a pretty big decision, and as Glenn said, this has Councillor Cooper, Comrade Cooper, it's there are real world consequences for whatever number we arrive at, right? So maximum consideration is always a good idea, I think, because once you're done, you're done. You know,
What I'm
so to
also
speak.
what I'm
Well,
also keen to do is
theoretically.
not get into a position where we spend a long time on this, then we have other things this afternoon, and we're deferring the rest of the agenda until later today. So I think if we can whip through some of the
Okay.
other items on the agenda, and then have a bit of a break so that people at least have 10, 15 minutes to have a look at things, and then carry on with this paper. So we'll pause this paper now. Thank you for the presentation. And we'll consider what you've had to say to us a little bit later. So I just think it's important that because we got the report so late, I just don't want people to say didn't have enough time. Just checking, Liz on Zoom, are you okay to stay up later? I know it's quite late where you are.
Yes, I was heading for 1 o'clock in the morning here, but that's all right. I'm just going to say as another alternative, because I think it's actually a lot easier to understand this information if there's some debate around it. I think that helps clarify the thinking, because when you're presented with a whole pile of numbers, well, for some people, I know their eyes glaze over with that. So I just wondered whether it might be more sensible to commence some debate on it, but to perhaps pause the debate at a certain point.
Yeah, if we feel like
Is that possible?
we're not getting
Is
anywhere.
that procedurally possible?
Yeah, that is. You can pause the meeting at any time. Okay.
Because
No,
I
I'm
think
going to
that-
take that on. I think if we keep talking about it, we might get some idea about the things we might want to look into a little bit further. So,
Yes, I think let's
yeah,
toss
let's
it
press
around
on.
a bit while
Let's press on.
the presentation's still fresh in our minds, clarify our thinking amongst ourselves, and start forming some positions, but then have a break before we come
If
back
we
to the
need to.
final decision.
If we need to.
If we need to, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we have some recommendations on the screen in front of us and in our reports. So let's get through one, which is receiving the report. Do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Halliday, seconded by Councillor Warwick. All in favour, say aye. Aye, that's carried. So I'm going to move from the chair.
Madam Chair, can I just
What's in the report?
Can I just ask for a bit,
So the
bit of
recommendation?
clarity around the report?
Yep.
Number 9 on the report, not on the report in general, has a very simple summary of the decision that was made by this table last Thursday. We're back here relitigating this as such. And first time I read through the recommendations there, I was actually confused about what I'm actually even voting on with regards to what's been there. But one thing we're not voting on is whether we support the recommendation that was voted on last Thursday and passed. What we're doing here is we're actually revisiting each one of those scenarios one by one. And there's actually and then we've got to stop each one of these, in other words, vote against them, to actually endorse the decision made last week. And it almost seems construed. And I'm a little bit uncomfortable with it, to be honest, because I can't see there. I've got to say no, and there's actually nothing there that actually says, do you support what was agreed to last week? And maybe D comes close. But we've got to get through the other ones to get to it. So yeah, look, I'm nervous about this as a process, to be honest, because based around the decision that the table made last week, that we heard.
So another decision that the table made last week was that we would get more information and revisit these issues, which is what we're doing today. So,
I've expressed my
so
views,
I
Madam
actually think it's cleaner for the staff to have created more information, come back with recommendations, and then we just move through with the recommendations, because otherwise it's going to get even more confusing. And I want it to be very clear that we're coming to the table today with a paper with recommendations, which is why I'm wanting to move through the recommendations, which we either support or don't support. There's still the opportunity for the decisions last week that were made last week to be made, the same decisions to be made this week, but we're not putting last week's paper back on the table. This is a report with more information, fresh recommendations, which we're moving and seconding today. But we'll move through it at a pace where people have full opportunity to put any options they want to on the table.
Thank
But
you,
for
Madam
now,
Chair.
yeah.
I was quite happy with information last week. That's why
But for
I
now-
based my decision on.
Yeah, well, some of us, the whole table needs to be happy with the decision that's there. So I'm going to move.
I've got the same
B.
concerns that Martin had, if I'd just like to raise them. Firstly, I don't actually understand. We had full access to the CE, the CFO. We had questions, we had debate, we had a robust discussion for close to 2 to 3 hours and made a decision. And I'm a little bit of a loss to how we've ended up now going back to the decision we made 6 days ago and relitigating the decision that was made. We had the table that was here was a table that was here, and that's the table you get.
So, yeah,
who
okay.
had all the information.
I can hear what you're saying. I'm
opportunities to
moving.
vote,
I
and we
am
did vote.
moving B. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Wilson. Okay, so I'll open by responding to those concerns. So this is an important decision which affects the next 10 years of our ratepayers in the district. If anybody around the table felt like a decision was made, which wasn't one of the recommendations which had gone through the long-term plan process, it was something that was presented on the day. We have way more information this week to be able to make an informed decision about the impacts in 3 years as well as 10 years, and that's really important. And we are where we are with the recommendation that's in front of us. There's the same opportunity that there was last week to not agree with this recommendation and to have the same result as last week. We now have all the councillors around the table, which is also really important as we go through the long-term plan process. Now, the reason I'm supporting this recommendation to go to the recommendation itself is predominantly that the thing that's top of my mind after the presentations we had today is that 3-year outlook. With this option, if we vote, no matter how the next one goes, if we do this now, then we are leaving the next council in a firm financial footing. We're not relying on the next council to dig us out of a debt hole that we've created. It's what we went out to consult on. It's what the majority of people said they want. And we didn't hear people saying that they want us to debt fund so that we can reduce rates this year. We didn't hear that. I didn't hear that in the consultation, only by a few people. And to respect the consultation we've gone through, to respect the consultation document that we've gone out saying we're going to build a resilient future, to me, this is the way to do it. Not to debt fund operating costs, not to mortgage the house to pay for the groceries. And that's where I'm sitting on this one. So that's my opening statement. So what I suggest we do is continue the debate on this. I'm happy to receive any amendments at any time, or if this motion fails, then we can bring another motion to the table. And we can word that so it's not a direct negative. Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I don't want to use this as my time to debate this, but I just did want to point out in relation to the questions that were raised, is that procedurally this process is a legal process, so it's important to note that. It also acknowledges the iterative process of LTPs. That's what happens in an LTP process. In fact, my biggest concern, which I raised last week, was with the motion that came up last week. I thought that potentially created a consultative jeopardy position for council because of what we actually went out and consulted on. And so, and the other problem, of course, was last week's motion. Well, maybe a few people, but most people at the table hadn't had time to consider those numbers in relation to other numbers. And so bringing it back, I don't have any problem with bringing it back, whether you wanted to support the original, the amendments or not, whatever people want to do, that's cool. But I think this process is really important, and it's a transparent process. So that's my view on the process.
Councillor Warwick?
My take from the community is that they're very in favour of us not taking on more debt, and we're just taking on more debt and more debt, and it's not going to do us good.
Yeah, so we've got a motion in front of us on the table. Do I have any more debate, including those online?
Yes.
Councillor Coe?
Look, the way I see this is we are in very difficult financial times, and people are really feeling the pain. Council itself is also feeling the pain. But I think, council needs to be mindful of that situation, but we're not here to rescue people from that situation. We're in a stage of the economy that is being worked through, where hopefully we'll come out the other side with lower interest rates and a much more stable economy where things start growing again. So, we're not going to be in this state forever. Things will get better. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And I think, picking up on your point that you mentioned briefly there, Janet, at the moment we are using the credit card to pay for the groceries, and that is not sustainable. And not only that, but we're not repaying the credit card debt, and so the interest is compounding. To me, we only have two options here. We either up our revenue, or we cut our expenditure. We don't take on debt to fund the gap, because that's only compounding the problem over time. So while people might get short-term relief from having not such a big rates increase, as we've seen from those longer-term projections, people end up worse off in the end because of the higher interest that they're paying over the long term. So to me, the most cost-effective long-term solution for ratepayers is to take the hit now and really get on top of that debt. And this is something that we should have been doing much earlier in the game. I was amazed to find out just the other week that we've had some years of debt funding depreciation, which, to be honest, I was quite horrified at that. I think now is the time for fiscal responsibility. We need to get ourselves onto a sound footing to reduce our debt levels, to create the headroom that we need to cope with disasters. And it just makes so much sense to go with the recommendations as tabled. Yes, it's hard for people, but as I say, we are not here to rescue people from the current financial situation they're in, which is being caused by a multiple of factors, not just rates increases, but insurance increases, mortgage increases, etc., etc. We can't save people from all of those things. We are in tough times no matter what, but those times will get better. Let's get ourselves onto a really good footing with what's been proposed here, so that in the medium to longer term, we are much, much better off than we are now, and paying a lot less in interest. That's it from me.
Thank you, Councillor Coe. Councillor Kirby?
Thank you, Your Worship. As the mover of the alternate motion last Thursday, I thought it might be appropriate for me to make some comments today. I think for me, the point, we can look at all the figures and the graphs and the pictures that paint 1,000 words, all that kind of thing. But the thing for me is we've got to remember our rates revenue as a council comes directly out of our ratepayers' pockets. It's not something that we magic up. It's not something that we create. It is something that they work hard for and they earn, and then we are legislated to be able to take money at will out of our ratepayers' pockets. With that comes a significant responsibility for us to ensure that we are using that money to the best of our ability. I'm super conscious in this environment that we are in a situation as a council where we are trying to balance debt reduction and affordability for our ratepayers. That is what we've consulted on. That's what is the message of our financial strategy. That is the emphasis of this long-term plan. I would propose that, from what I see of the figures, the best way to get the balance of those is to not go with 17, but to go with 12. That's why I moved that last week, and I will continue to stand on that one. So on this particular resolution, recommendation B, I'll be voting against it.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Lawrence. I think you articulated that very well. So I'll build on that kōrero with my own views. But last week I've assimilated the information, and we had to make decisions, and I made a decision with the information that was in hand, as I have done for the last 4 years. Sometimes you get time, sometimes you don't. That's the nature of the beast. But I wanted to highlight one thing. This table didn't create this debt hole. And as Liz has pointed out, this should have been being done years ago. And I applaud the CE with regards to, and the whole team, with regards to efforts that have gone in to minimise this as much as can be. Hopefully some more time will help advance that. We're slowing it down. We're not stopping it. But you can always pay off debt when there's a big bucket of money. So taking on what you're saying, Lawrence, I also won't be supporting this motion as we move forward. I was very happy with my decision last week.
Councillor Hanford.
Yorta, hopefully you can hear me all right. Just really briefly to total for the Mayor's comments and also those of Councillor Cove, and also in a way Councillor Halliday's in terms of standing where we did last Thursday. I'm still really comfortable to, well, I guess, support this recommendation that's on the table now, and standing in terms of this being a long-term plan and the consideration again across those 3 and then out to 10 years, and the impact and affordability on our ratepayers, for our ratepayers, and also the consideration of our future. Like, this is supposed to be a long-term plan, and recognising that there won't just be one silver bullet to solve what is a problem across the whole of the local government sector around the increased costs and also just the constrained environment that our community finds itself in. So I definitely don't see the solution to that being to look at cutting levels of service, or to look at kind of reining things, or trying to find ways to fund through debt. I think that if we can, as Liz said now, take the hit, and as Liz said, take the hit now, and then build more resilience into the future operations of council, to be able to pass that on. I think that's a really valuable step and commitment that we can make as a table, and I agree that it makes sense. And coming back to the Mayor's point too around the community also not wanting us to take on more debt, I think that really says something, that they were willing to take an extra 5% increase on their rates for this first year to be able to get ourselves into a position where we've got slightly more of a hold on the debt that we're taking on. So apologies if that's incoherent, what I've just said. I was literally just landed in Tokyo like an hour or so ago, so I'm a little bit all over the show, but yeah, looking forward to hearing the rest of the debate, and we'll be voting in support of this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Hanford. Councillor Wilson, have you already contributed to debate?
No.
No? Okay.
So I made the point that I wasn't contributing earlier. I was just clarifying something. Another point of clarification, so it's a question. So are you, is what I've seconded, I hope I'm right, A through F of the recommendations?
No, we're just doing B.
Okay, cool. Right. We're not going to have a debate on each A, B, C, D, E, F, are we? Or are
I
we?
think it's important to do B and C separately, and then we'll probably take the rest as a group.
Okay. Oh, well, I might encapsulate most of my remarks first time round.
But feel free to just make your remarks on future ones as well, because they kind of interrelate.
Yeah.
But I think there are various, and we're going to have to be cognizant of that as we move through the debate, but it's important that we are able to have individual comments so that we can go with different combinations of B and C.
Okay. Well, I'll try not to dance over.
I'm not sure. Yes.
Sorry. I was understanding we were debating B, not B and C together.
Yeah, it's just B. Yep.
Okay.
It's just B. Yeah.
In that case, yeah, I support the amendment.
The motion that's on the table.
Yeah. I mean, the substantial stuff is going to come later then. No point in making a big speech.
So no, B is to rates fund the Three Waters shortfall.
Yeah. Well, actually, I will make one quick comment on that then.
Yeah.
And that is just because we have heard from everybody, including Martin and Liz, that rates funding OPEX is largely what's got us in the situation in the first place. So it makes no sense to be rate funding, debt funding, to cancel that. What we've heard is that debt funding OPEX is a really, really bad idea, and I agree 100%. And so that's what this does. This stops us from debt funding OPEX. You rate fund OPEX. You don't debt fund it. It just makes no sense whatsoever. So, yeah.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you through the chair. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge my fellow councillors for the thought that they've put into this. And obviously there is a divergence in opinions. As a councillor who's sat around the table, this is my second triennium, you know, I've seen how difficult these decisions are, and quite often it's actually very easy to kick the can down the road. On this situation, I'm actually going to agree with, I'm going to vote for this recommendation. You know, we can't keep on kicking the can down the road, and to me, this, you know, this and, you know, hopefully some of the other recommendations we're going to make today will actually still help to build our resilience. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further debate? I think everybody's pretty much had a say. Councillor Warwick, do you have a question? Because you've already contributed to the debate.
A question is, if B is voted for, it affects the rest of the amendments because we can't then go with 12%, is that right? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Councillor Coфord.
Oh, sorry, we don't appear to have a full house, but apparently we have one.
Councillor Cooper is going to join online now, apparently.
Thank you.
Oh, I wouldn't mind actually giving him the opportunity to set up. I don't know how far away he is.
But if I could continue, I just have a comment about my previous...
Yeah, no, we'll just keep going.
Yeah.
It's no different to somebody slipping out.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
use the
No,
restroom.
I just... I think the presentation has been brilliant, and I really take my hat off to Mark and the team. But I still have that question about, you know, the intensity of the projected cost requirements. I mean, I'm not into maths that much. I just did stage 1 at Varsity, but even I can see that, you know, you can make these predictions, and quite often they're pretty heavy predictions as far as the infrastructure goes in the next 10 years, and in my view unrealistic, and I think they're just a little bit overcooked. And we've got ratepayers out there that are really hurting at the moment. How many? 600 are having severe problems?
696. 696.
696 at the moment, and that's at the present situation. If we go up 17% overnight, you know, I just dread what the effects are going to be. And I believe that my old philosophy is that you pay for infrastructure over 10 years or over the life of them, 50 years, and I think the people in 50 years' time will be getting the benefit of the infrastructure we're putting in now, and perhaps they should be paying for that as well. And so you get a loan, so they pay it off. It's fairness over time. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further debate. Oh, Kim.
Kia ora. I'm mindful that what I'm going to say is probably not going to be helpful at all, but it's my opinion. Take it or leave it. Take it or leave it. So basically, counting is easy. And firstly, thank you to the team, because running numbers is a mind-boggling. It's a minefield, and when you run so many numbers and you always land in the same place, it's really, really annoying. But basically, that's what you had to do, because we need to see numbers. So I'm not going to question any of those numbers, because they all pretty much land in the same place. And I'm not trying to relitigate, but when we made the decision to not cut services, we unintentionally made the decision to have a higher rates, unfortunately. And that is, if you want to spend more, you need to get more money, and you can only get it through income or debt, and we all know that. I understand that this is people are really hurting, and I get that, and so I do not envy the decision on the table by anyone. However, as I sat through the LTP submissions, we always get told that council should fund, and I won't call them essential services, but council services, infrastructure, and all that things, and people have a different opinion on what essential is. So if we are going to continue to fund things outside of what council should be doing, then we are going to continue to have to increase rates. So either we need to really look at our spending, which we can't do now because we've said we can't cut services, or we need to make a hard call on rates. And the one thing that stuck out to me, and when the Kuia come and spoke, she spoke about living within their means. So we have become a society of wants and not needs. And that is the issue. Not the numbers on the screen, but that we want too much. And we're not willing to sacrifice our own comforts for the greater good. It's hard enough to balance a budget when you're at home. I can't even imagine what that looks like. But if we keep wanting as a society and as Kapiti, then we're going to have to expect to pay. And this is probably more a message to people listening than anything else, is that you can't have both. You can't. And it's really hard for us to sit here and make that call, knowing the impact it's going to make on families out there, because we too are families. And we too have to go home to our children and go, you can't have both. So that's the decision on the table. This is us trying to fix a problem that is out there, and if we don't fix the problem that's out there, this will continue. And that's all I have to say.
I actually think that's very helpful, Kim, and I'm tempted to make that the right of reply in a way. To me, as a right of reply, I can see how it works with the tables and the numbers paying off our expenses and debt over 10 years. But as Councillor Pravanov said, we both have the experience where you fall off that wagon. We had a beautiful Green Line strategy which was going to achieve this, and COVID came along, and it fell away, and we didn't follow the course. So I'm looking at this option in a 3-year view. Where do we leave the next council? Do we leave them still scrambling to balance our books and put us on a firm financial footing and preparing for a resilient Kapiti? Or do we leave them with increased debt? And so hard as it is, it's not easy for any of us. I'm still in support of this motion today. I think what we really need to do is be extremely proactive about how we help people to get the assistance they need through spreading their payments throughout the year and through our rates remission and rates rebate schemes. We also need to look hard at how we can pull this figure down next year by looking hard at what we do as an organisation and through the next annual plan, making some hard calls on levels of service, if that's what our community tells us they want. And that's what we need to be asking them as we go out through our mini engagement processes, including Vision Carpity. So I will now put this to the vote. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against?
Aye.
Aye.
Against?
Against me on video.
Yep, got that. Does anybody want to call a division? Yep, we're calling a division. All in favour, please raise your hands. Sophie, is that tick a raised hand?
Yep, that's in favour.
And Liz has got a hand there as in favour. So online we have Councillor Hanford and Councillor Coe.
Thank you.
You should read the rest.
Councillor Wilson, Councillor Pravanov, Councillor Warwick, and your worship. That's 6.
All those against?
I'll do
So Councillor Cooper online.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Halliday, Councillor Spires, Councillor Coford.
That's carried. So now we move on to C. And this is whether we now have ongoing 6%. The other options on the table are 7% and 8%. So as there are 3 options there, and it's not a clear for or against, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move what's on the what the recommendation is from the chair, and call for a seconder. If I don't have a seconder, we'll ask for an alternative motion to be moved. And after that's moved and seconded, at any time, somebody can move an amendment to that to suggest a different figure. Does that make sense? Yeah, so I'm moving the recommendation that's on the screen, which is 6%. Do I have a second? No, 7%, sorry, 7%, yeah, 7%. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Warwick? Yeah, a right of introduction. To be honest, to me, this decision isn't as crucial as the first one. We'll have a chance to look at this through the next annual plan process. And to me, the 7% with the reduction in debt that happens in 3 years, that's what I think we should be aiming to achieve. So that's why I'll support this. Any further debate or amendments? Councillor Halliday?
Oh, Liz can go first.
Councillor Coe?
Oh, sorry. Look, there's a point I wanted to make under the previous one, which I'll make now, and just picking up on something you said, Janet. I do think we have a lot of work to do around reporting back to our community on our performance and outcomes and what it costs to actually provide council services, and to use the Vision Carpity process and perhaps a new reporting framework so that we can actually say hand on heart to our community that there is no fat in the system, and also to potentially give them some options about service levels. And I think this is something, as you said in your in your introduction, that we need to work on over the next year. And we need to really knuckle down on this, because we hear time and time again that the community are saying, oh, council are wasting our money. This is our hard-earned money, and where's it all going? We don't know where it goes. We don't know what happens to it. And surely it's all getting wasted on consultants and fancy ideas and nice-to-have projects. Now, I think we have a lot of work to do in the next 12 months, and we have to absolutely nail this if we want to leave this council in good shape for the next triennium. We have to have really good systems where we can transparently report back to our community on the effectiveness of council's performance and where the ratepayer money goes to, and to find ways, whether it's using Vision Carpity or whatever, to allow the community to give us, some better direction on what we should and shouldn't be doing. So I'll just add that into the mix. I don't think it needs a separate recommendation, but I think it's something we just need to take on board over the next 12 months, that while, we're making this commitment to, the 7% ongoing, that may change once we've done that analysis. So, what we're setting in place today isn't set in stone for the next 10 years or whatever. There endeth my
Thank you,
my little
Councillor
speech.
Coe. Councillor Kirby.
I'm just deciding. I'm probably in the view of a 7, and whether I move an amendment to this. Sorry, of a 6, not a 7. Whether I move an amendment.
The other, if it fails too, then another motion can be put on the table, because it's not a direct negative. That's the other scenario. Doesn't have to be an amendment. It's up to the table how they'd like to proceed.
Okay, I'll leave it and we'll debate on this, shall we? I'm pretty sure a certain councillor to my left might do differently to me, but at this stage, for me, I note in this motion it says that we apply an annual rates revenue increase of 7% after growth to build a resilient future and actively reduce debt. There is no mention of affordability in that, and that's why I would be voting against this, because I think the whole posture of our long-term plan has been the balance of reducing debt and affordability, and we are not addressing affordability at all with 7%.
Councillor Halliday.
Through Madam Chair, yes, I'd like to move an amendment to the motion that reads the same as it reads, that change the number from 7 to 6%.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Spires. Right of introduction to the amendment.
I found this paper leading with regards to how the recommendations have been worded. They're exact opposite. You've basically got to agree to this, these recommendations, or not. And yeah, so I've made an amendment. Quite frankly, I don't actually think it makes a heck of a difference, but I'm going to make the amendment for the simple reason is that following on from what Councillor Coe just referred to, and yourself, and also with what Councillor Kirby, or Deputy Mayor Kirby, has just said as well, that I think we'll be looking at different figures in the next annual plan. And I think we'll be actually looking at different figures through the whole entire 10 years. We're stuck between a rock and a hard place, I fully get that, and I realise that we are legislated to be stuck in between a rock and a hard place. And I know that we've loosened things up a little bit with regards to giving the organisation the ability to, I think, work in a more effective manner by the way they do business, i.e. the 3 years, and other things as well. We are tied with legislation around all this, and I get that. So I'm just going to leave it at that. We've done this to death, and quite frankly, actually I shouldn't say that. Quite frankly, I just want to take that back a little bit. I want to thank officers for all the work that's gone into putting very good information in front of us, so that we can make an informed decision on things. Hasn't gone the way I'd have liked it to have gone. That's the nature of the table. I'm that happy with how we've got to the decision making that we're making today, considering what was done last week. But that is its may. That's within the rules of how the table works as such. So yes, I'd like to make that amendment, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so there's a little bit of confusion around amendments and amendments to amendments and things, but I think we know we're on 6 and we're debating 6 right now. Okay, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, so speaking to the amendment from 7 to 6 takes us back to what the reason for 7 was in the first place. And if you have a look, it says that number 7 was to build a resilient future and actively reduce debt. So that was the point. That's the point of any increase, right? 6 changes that significantly. It doesn't do that anywhere near as effectively as 7 does. So we've seen that in the numbers. And I know it's always popular to be promoting less rate rise, and we know everybody's hurting, and we know all of those sorts of things. But we also know, as Kim pointed out, we didn't go and ask people about service cuts. You know, what services do you want us to cut to get to these magic numbers? The financially prudent number, given what we've already gone with, is 7%, not 6. And there's a likelihood that we will end up in that 17 as opposed to 12, although that's to come. But I know it's easier to make the argument in favour of a low rate rise, but we have to consider what that means in real terms. And at the moment, we pay $173,000 a week in interest, right? So getting debt reduced should be the number one priority for this council. That's every week another $173,000 goes out to the bank. And you just think about what you would want to do in your social spending space with $173,000. Just 1 week of that would be lovely, thanks. So reducing that is absolutely vital. To become a caring council, doing the kind of stuff that's important to us beyond just the functioning, requires that we be in a financially prudent position. So reducing debt is absolutely crucial. The marginal difference between 6% and 7% impact on ratepayers isn't as it's not, as we've already seen with the numbers, it isn't a net saving. This is the irony of this, is actually people who are advocating for a lower rate are actually voting for a higher rate ultimately for the ratepayers, but it's the bankers would be loving it. The John Key clause, which should cause it. Anyway, 7% makes sense. So I'm going to vote against the amendment.
Councillor Kirby.
So I'll pull us back to our consultation. The majority of people supported 6% in our consultation on the long-term plan, which is why we made the amendment last Thursday from, well, actually the recommendation last Thursday that was presented in the report was for 6% to align with our consultation. So I would implore the table to at least take that into account.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, through the chair. So we spent several hours listening to a very good presentation and explanation from Mark, given 5 scenarios. This table has made a decision to recommend with the previous recommendation. And I suppose when you make these decisions, they aren't in isolation. You've got to look about what else is going to be made. And by actually going with 6%, you're actually probably putting yourself in a worse position than if this table had gone with 12%. So I will be voting against 6%.
Councillor Cofford.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to work out my maths here.
As we all are, Councillor Cofford.
Look, I've done some graphs here. And I've worked out that 1% is a hell of a lot over 10 years. Is it? It's about 10 million, is it? It's 10 million, yeah. And just remember, 17% the first year compounds itself the second year, which is 17 and 17 is 34, plus another 7 is 41. Yeah. Is that right? Okay, should we do it? So what I'm saying is it's compounding. At 17, it's compounding a lot. Okay. And just softly, I think 6%, but really, yeah, thank you.
Any further debate on the amendment? So I'm taking a vote on...
Do I have right of reply, Madam Chair?
Oh, right of reply for the amendment.
Thank you. Interesting, the last comments just made by Councillor Provanov. Yes, we did. Had a 2-hour presentation. We had similar last week as well. We had 3 hours of debate where we talked all this through. And it's unfortunate that other councillors weren't there for that. That's why we make decisions when we make decisions. I think Lawrence points is very relevant. Here we are talking about the consultation and we're getting pushed back up to 17.5. Yet we're ignoring the second part of it. And this is why we do things the way that we do things. While I've got the floor, Kim, your points were very relevant. Thank you for expressing them. I'll see where this goes.
Okay, so I'll put that amendment to the vote. All in favour, please say aye. So we're voting for 6. Aye. No, I'm not.
Sorry, aye from.
So I'll take them again. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
Aye.
No.
No.
Okay, I think we need a division.
No.
I'm going to call a division on that. Can I just, is there anybody who voted? I think the division is the same as, but, and nobody's called it. I'll withdraw my request. Oh, we've called a division? Okay. All in favour, raise your hands.
Yeah,
For
I'm raising my
6%.
hand.
Deputy Mayor, Councillor Halliday, Councillor Coford, Councillor Spires, and online Councillor Cooper.
Yep, correct. Thanks, boss.
That's 5.
Thank you.
That's 5-4. Against? Councillor Wilson.
I was against.
Thank you.
I was against as well.
Thank you. Councillor Warwick. Councillor Provanov. Online Councillor Coe and Councillor Hanford. Your worship. That's 6 against.
So we now need to go back to the substantive motion and vote on that.
Given that I haven't spoken on that,
Yeah.
so I would like
Yeah,
to.
so we're
just
now
very
we're
briefly.
now debating back to 7%.
Yeah. Look, there was some confusion, I think. Last week, when, just to clarify a point here, when the 12% passed, you could make a case for 6% with 17%. You could make a case for 7%, 16%, with 17%. I don't think you can make a case for anything less than 7 with a 12. Maybe an 8 is an argument, right? So, but seven's the number that we arrived on. And so for all of those reasons that I said before about the importance of reducing debt, and then what this amendment, what the motion that we're looking at, it is about building a resilient future and actively reducing debt. And that's what this is about. And that's what I think it will achieve. And you've got an annual plan. If things go interesting, you've got an annual plan process that can change things. But for now, setting us on a course to reduce that debt, to be the most truly transparent council that this has been, to be that, this is the track I think we've got to go down.
Thank you. Any further debate? I'm going to waive my right of reply. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? So we're now taking a vote on 7%. I don't think everybody's voted. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Okay. Does anybody want to call a division? Yep, we're calling a division. Everybody who voted in favour, please raise your hands or say yo on screen.
This is in favour.
Yes, I voted in favour.
So we have
Yeah,
Councillor
in
Coe and
favour as well.
Councillor Hanford online.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Provanov, Councillor Crowford,
I'm against it.
Councillor Warwick. And Worship. Against?
Yep, I'm against.
Thank
Coops
you.
online.
Councillor Cooper online, Councillor Halliday and Councillor Squires. It's carried.
So that's carried. So I don't think we need to change. I don't think we need to. I mean, I don't think we need to take the rest separately because that's pretty much. I haven't heard anybody disagreeing with those so far. Does anybody want to move them all together? And then if anybody wants any of them taken separately, they can let me know and we'll debate those and vote on those separately. So
I'm happy to move them.
So we're now moving D through F. D through F. Moved by Councillor Kirby, seconded by Councillor Wilson. If anybody wants any of those taken separately, they can let me know and we'll debate and vote on them separately. Nobody?
Yeah, look, I'd ask them separately if you don't mind.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so we're now, we've had D moved and seconded by Councillor Kirby and Councillor Wilson. We'll now discuss that.
Assuming there's a right of interaction, Madam Chair.
Yep.
Did you wave it on my behalf, Councillor Halliday? Thank you. Oh dear. Well, I'll only say after the previous votes, this is obvious, really. It has to be this. So that's where I'll sit.
Okay, any further comment? Councillor Watson?
Yeah, this is where my substantial comments were for the entire show. I certainly don't take the idea of announcing to the public that they're going to get a 17% rate rise lightly. It's really significant. But this is about reducing debt, it's about resilience, it's about all of those sorts of things. And I do know Horowhenua, for instance, initially had we're looking at 24%, and they got it down to 17.6, which is what they went and consulted on, which included all of the service cuts. So they were quite transparent about what those service cuts equaled. Porirua at 17.5, Wellington's the thick end of 20, and Greater Wellington's 20.56. So where we are as a council, I think, is in a very similar place to everybody else. I remain very optimistic that there will be a change of government and we'll get back to sort of some sane views over the Three Waters program and how that might be funded. But for now we're stuck with what we've got, right? And I would make the point that for those of us who were alive then, and Sophie, history lesson time for you, in the pre-1980s, when infrastructure was built, it was largely built as a hybrid funding model between central government and local government. Prior to that, it was pretty much all paid for by central government, right? Ministry of Works. And that was the model. It was a bit like our roading is now, right? So we pay half, they pay half. So since then, what we've seen is that we've moved, the central government since the 80s have moved increasingly towards local government picking up the entire bill. And the problem is that most of that infrastructure that was paid for by two parties is now failing or on the point of failing and needing to be replaced, and the only people paying for it are us. So Sam Broughton, president of LGNZ, made this very point And Brad Olson, who's the principal economist at Infometrics, was making the same point as well, and that is that local government costs are blowing out and central government needs to step up. If interest rates go up, then OPEX suffers, so it's really interesting to see where that comes. I think ultimately, though, reducing debt is crucial. I also think self-insurance is crucial. Hopefully through our annual plan process, we will all get wise to that. The largest insurer in New Zealand, which is IAG, had a profit increase of 138% in 2023. In 2024, the first 6 months, the projection is a 50% increase in the profit of that. So compound that. Well, yeah, the reason it's on topic is because the 17% isn't just a fairyland number. It's based on stuff, and it's based on insurance increases as a chunk of it. And what I'm saying is that the insurance industry are gouging councils and have been for a long time.
Could you wind it up, please, Councillor Wilson?
And so we have an opportunity to do something about that. The last thing that this doesn't address, and I've got another minute, is the whole discussion around this is about ratepayers. A third of the people who live in Kapiti are renters. If you're a ratepayer, in the last 10 years, let's assume your rates have doubled in 10 years. If you take the compounding number on a $400,000 house, the compounding number you'd have paid about $32,000 in rates in that period. In that same period, your house value has increased by $400,000 on average. Your net wealth has increased by $370,000 above rates. Now, that's not applied to every house. We're talking about averages here, right? If you're a renter, your rent increase has increased by 85% in that time, except you have no capital value gain. There's no gain for you at all. It's just pure loss. So for the third of the people in Kapiti, they are really getting slammed. So what we have to think about, that's where service cuts really hit those people, and user pays, cost increases, etc. So those people who are already getting slammed get slammed again when you have service cuts or you increase the cost of participating in our community. So, yeah. So I know people are hurting out there, but everybody's hurting. Renters are struggling, homeowners are struggling with these, and the core thing that this council can do is get its debt down. That helps everybody.
Any further debate? Councillor Kirby.
Just a right of reply, because I probably won't say much more than this. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the staff for the work that they've put in after last Thursday, particularly the information they've given us, Mark, Cheryl, Jing and the team. Thank you so much for the work you've put in for this. I think we all feel well informed. The other thing I'd just acknowledge is my fellow councillors and Mayor Janet. I know this has been a difficult journey, and while we're divided over the vote, on the whole, I think as a council we have a great spirit, and together we leave the table and we'll have a laugh while we carry the weight of the decisions that we've just made. So thank you to all journeying this journey to make the decisions we've made today, which are really hard ones. And I just want to acknowledge that and your leadership through this too, Mayor Janet. And the last one I want to acknowledge as we move through is our community and ratepayers. I think if you've listened to our debate, you will have heard very clearly from everyone on both sides of the argument here that we very keenly feel what is going on for you as our community and ratepayers. And please don't ever feel like we ignore you through this process. So thank you.
Thank you for that. So we're voting on D at the moment. All in favour, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Against?
I abstain from the vote, Madam Chair.
Aye.
Yeah,
So,
I'll abstain as well. That's Coops online abstaining.
so we note that Councillor Halliday and Councillor Cooper abstain. Councillor Spires, Councillor. So nobody's called a division. But we actually, if we note abstentions, we don't need a division, do we? So we just note that those people abstained. I think it was unanimous apart from that, so there's no need to call a division. Yep, okay. Have I got that right? Yep. Okay, so now we move on to E and F, which have been moved by Councillor Kirby and seconded by Councillor Wilson, I believe. Any debate on those? Councillor Halliday?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that although I'm not ranting and raving, I am raging inside. And because I let fly last triennium, got a little bit told off for that. But it's just I was going to say that. No other comment.
Okay. Any further debate on E and F? All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against?
Aye.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. That was Liz. Okay. Okay, so they're carried unanimously. Thank you all. It's been a really difficult, as Councillor Kirby said, it's been a really difficult journey, and I'd just like to really acknowledge the staff and thank you for the extra work that's gone in over the last week as we come up with some kind of, as we respond to the process in our own ways. But I feel like the table is more informed than it was before, and we've really made considered decisions knowing the future impacts of what's on the table. And I think that's really important, and I make no apology for that. Moving on with the agenda, I'm going to move the tene whanga item up, so we're now going to consider 10.3. Is that all we needed to do around that paper? Just checking, we've closed off 10.1. Yep, so we're on 10.3, tene whanga Community Centre.
And I'm leaving the meeting now, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coe, for your attendance. Sleep well. I'd like to welcome Mr. Mellon to the table.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Is your Kiwi accent going to get stronger?
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you. So I don't have anything further to add to the paper with regard to the recommendations around the demolition of the Te Whanga Community Centre building and then working through what the alternatives might look like in terms of providing a community facility either on that site or in that general sort of area. But so happy to answer any questions. And I would just add, we have, in terms of working with Te Whanga, the whānau, in terms of the demolition process, that's certainly something that we've talked about in terms of the project itself, and also working closely with them in terms of whatever shape or form that name may take, or the facility or the site might take with regard to that process as well.
Any questions? Councillor Kirby.
Yeah, just a brief one. I'm conscious that directly in behind Te Whanga is the Bridge Club building. Can you just confirm for me that there has been a conversation with that organisation about the plans or process that's underway for the building that's directly in front of them?
Who's answering that?
Yeah, I'd have to check back with the project team on that one, Councillor. Sorry, I don't know specifically, but I do know we have been talking to stakeholders and they are directly affected. I'm not sure whether Morag has anything to add, but she may be able to give some clarification on that.
Yeah, so we've been working with the Bridge Club through obviously the development of the meanwhile space, and as part of that conversation, obviously the future of the building and it potentially coming down was discussed. But in terms of a formal conversation about that, that would be happening once we know whether that is happening or not.
Councillor Kirby, do you have a follow-up question? So Councillor Kirby's microphone, please.
Thank you for that. That's good. I'm conscious that that building potentially is in the way for future plans of development around the whole piece of land. Are they leasing that land from us for that building?
Yes, is my understanding. They leased that site.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Councillor Halliday.
Yeah, look, couple of quick questions. The governance, project governance board. Look, who's on that? I was just a reminder would be much appreciated.
I'm going to have to ask Maureen to answer that one as well.
Are you talking, sorry, just to clarify, that the governance board for the Tinifanga project? So, yeah. So internally, there's obviously a couple of our GMs, but also there is an iwi representative that sits on there as well. I can go through individual names if you want, or provide them out to email out to councillors to let you know.
I think it's better to email them out.
Yep.
I don't think that we expect that to be
Happy with that.
publicly stated today. Yep.
So I've been involved in this this project for, well, quite a while. In fact, actually, even pre-elections, one of the reasons why I stood. And I love number 6. It's almost like a once upon a time story. But there were real issues in that whole process, as such, which I was a part of. But I'm not dwelling on them. What we're going to go into them. But I do note that we've had budget for this that keeps getting moved out, and I appreciate we've had COVID, and I appreciate that we've had organisational change. But if I could just flag that potentially, if we could have sort of like a regular report back structure to the Social Sustainability Committee, so that we can just keep abreast of this, would be much appreciated, and see how that goes. Quite happy for that information to come to that meeting as well, a next meeting, if you like, as part of an initial update. Yeah, that would be much appreciated if that could be taken into consideration as such.
We'll take that into consideration for sure. That's a good suggestion. Thanks,
thank you for
Councillor
that.
Halliday. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I just wanted to concur with Martin on that. I think this should go through that Social Sustainability Committee. I think it's a good idea, given who the likely tenants are going to be in the future. I think that fits very nicely. Just wondering about getting the bulldozer. To D of this, otherwise it's largely just noting, but the proposed demolition is 2024-25. Start your engines. I mean, is there a reason why Charlie and his bulldozer aren't there tomorrow?
Well, we're only
assuming we vote for it.
Yeah, the decision by council to move ahead with the project has been why we haven't advanced that work. And next financial year is not that far away in terms of a date. So
financial year, sorry.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
So from 1 July, we'd look to now program in contract availability and that sort of thing in terms of the demolition.
And in terms of the further investigation, the Kathy Spires sports, no, it didn't say memorial. I didn't say that. Sports and Recreation Centre. I do note that, for instance, and I'm not quite sure how wide those discussions are. We did get something that came in, but I do know Capital Basketball, for instance, have made a move on Porirua City Council and their LTP to relocate from Hutt City to Porirua. There might be, if Porirua don't say yes, and I think there's a possibility they might not, we've got Hoop Club Kapiti. We would be, I think, ideally placed to welcome them and at least have a discussion with it. So I'm just flagging that, and I hope somebody would have that chat. Damien Ecanasio is really keen to make a move into an area where basketball is flourishing, and thanks to the guys on the ground here, it's really flourishing in Kapiti for sure, particularly with our young people. So, a consideration.
Yeah, thanks. It certainly provides opportunities for the future, the decisions that we're making today. Councillor Kirby?
Sorry, I forgot one question on my list from before. Is about
okay.
about the meanwhile space. Do we have plans for that after the building's demolished? Like, is that going to be removed, or is it going to stay? What?
I'll get Morag to update on that one, but I'm pretty sure it's staying. But she can confirm.
Morag?
Yeah, kia ora. The purpose of that meanwhile space was to stay whilst the decisions around the future of the community centre were decided. So it's been designed in a way that we can actually be flexible with it, and if we're looking to expand or change the way it works to suit the needs of the community, particularly once the building is no longer there. So yes, at this stage it'd be looking to stay.
Great. It's good to hear it wasn't a waste of money.
Councillor Warwick?
I'm just curious about any recycling or what is going to happen with what's in the building that can be recycled with our new recycling plant or within the community. Is there plans for that?
Absolutely. So, luckily, we have a new location, as you've mentioned, Councillor, who I think it's Ben that's the manager there, be involved in that process and absolutely look to make as much reuse of anything we can out of that building.
Councillor Pravanov?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. In relation to E, and I know I've raised this before, but I am just double checking that any potential new building or use of this facility anywhere else will be considered amongst the suite of our building assets, so the decision is not made in isolation.
Absolutely correct, Councillor. There's another project that would come back through the elected members in terms of wherever we get to in terms of that process.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think that finishes the question. So I'm looking for a mover for A through E. The Deputy Mayor has also suggested an additional recommendation. I've got an indication from Councillor Halliday that he's wanting to move those and seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And I'll just see if Councillor Halliday is happy with the
Waived.
additional recommendation as well. You just need to have a look at what you're moving, Councillor Halliday, because there's an F. There's an F. Is it coming up on the screen? Have we got it ready? F reads, commits to the ongoing journey of the name of Tēnewhanga with the project as it continues into future phases, ensuring we honour the story and kaupapa of Tēnewhanga, valuing the taonga for future generations. That's in the light of the public speaker that we had today, who so eloquently addressed us this morning. So, right of introduction, Councillor Halliday. Waived. Any debate? Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? It's carried. Thank you. We can move on with the building and with the agenda. So now we're on to 10.2, voting in the 2024 Electra Trust election. Thank you very much, Morag and Sean. So we are on page 14.
Kia ora koutou. I'd like to take the report as read and happy to answer any questions.
Right, so the first thing we need to decide is, will we write? Will we exercise our right, which is A, or B, that council will exercise its right to vote and votes for, and we can put up to 3 names there. Councillor Kirby?
I'd be happy to move recommendation B, that
Yeah.
we vote.
And do you have any names to put in there?
For local Kapiti residents.
Which
would
be Penny Gaylor, Neil Mackay and John Yeaman.
Happy
Do
to
I have a
move that.
seconder? Seconded by councillor Warwick. Right of introduction.
I want to move an amendment.
Okay. What's your amendment?
Oh, the amendment is that we don't vote for 3, but we vote for those who are qualified for the position, which in this case is 2 from Kapiti. So that would be my amendment. I know that just voting for people from Kapiti doesn't make sense on its own. Voting for people with the skills to be there, that makes sense. These are people representing our interests.
So I don't see that anybody on that
No,
list
no, no.
doesn't have the skills to
Okay.
be on the Electric Trust Board.
No, you don't, but I do. That's why I moved the amendment.
Okay, so you would need to explain
All right.
in a public forum.
Yep. Happy
Why-
to do it in a public forum. Is the best
No,
way
no,
to do
no.
these things.
First of all, I'm looking for a seconder who's willing
Alright.
to second this public discussion about somebody's skills or
Who wants to be brave enough to do this?
seconded by councillor Pravanov.
Hang on, we haven't got the names specifically down for it to be seconded.
No, yes. So you're moving an amendment.
Yes.
So okay. So let's go back. I think if we're going to have this
Yeah.
discussion, we're going to have it in public excluded.
I would
Um,
advise that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to.
I'm happy to have my amendment heard in the public excluded anyway.
So I'm just going to pause this, and we'll consider it later in the day after we've moved into public excluded. And I'd now like to move on to confirmation of minutes, and then we can move into public excluded and deal with all that later. So we've got item
Not sure
item
about you,
11,
Madam
which
Mayor,
is
but my nutrition's
confirmation
starting to
confirmation of minutes.
have an impact on my nailing it.
Moved by councillor Kirby, seconded by councillor Coford. Any comments on the minutes apart from a minor correction, which I think is in the public excluded one anyway? All in favour?
Aye.
Against? That's carried. So what I'll do is I will adjourn the meeting until 3 o'clock. But first of all, we'll move into public excluded so that we can just regroup then. So I'll just let. Sorry, is that not right? Okay, I'll take advice.
So can we just explain the reasons for moving electoral report into P, like the privacy of natural persons?
So actually, we won't. We'll move into public excluded when we come back, and then we can outline the reasons for moving into public excluded and vote on that with the information in front of us. So I'll now adjourn this meeting. We're going to adjourn it until 3 o'clock, because we need a break for lunch, and then we have some externals coming in for a councillor and elected member training session from 1:30 to 3. I'll keep that training session tight to time, and we'll finish that at 3, and then carry on with the rest of the agenda, and hopefully we can be out of here by COB. So we'll now break. 5 o'clock, in other words. So we'll come back at just before 1:30 so we can get settled for our training at 1:30 and start that on time. So 25 past, you've got half an hour.